Hey guys, thanks for tuning in again to another episode here. As you know, we're speaking to a whole heap of experts across different business fields and industries and getting them to share their expertise and knowledge, especially through this COVID period, because there are a couple of people out there who are, finding it tough at this moment. And right here, we have someone who is a colleague, but I also like to call a friend. They're a keen property developer. They're enthusiastic about that. He's also a fun guy and very, very well experienced and well traveled. Director and finance strategist of MoneyLinks, his own business there. Brenden Lowbridge, how are you, mate?
Mate, I'm good. I'm good and excited to be on here with you, mate. Thanks for having me.
Oh, too easy. Look, I know I've given everyone a quick rundown version of who you are, but mate, I want to give you an opportunity just to elaborate on that. Share your experiences, your background, and go from there.
Mate, awesome. Well, the quick version is I finished school, and in the last year of school, everyone said be a real estate agent all the time, and I think it was just from talking and making jokes, and I don't know, just for whatever reason they thought that. And I thought, look, maybe there's something to that, and real estate agents have nice cars, so I did my real estate license straight out of school, and I thought that would probably be the end of my studying, but it ended up, through just how life takes you, Quang, as you'd know. I worked for 12 months with New South Wales' largest private property developer at the time on a big lakeside project, and worked with him. And then, look, the GFC hit, and that was obviously an interesting time, much like we're in sort of now, very interesting in many ways, and sort of decided, what am I going to do? I didn't actually like sort of walking someone through a home and telling them that they should buy it. I figured if someone wanted to buy a house and they were there, they would, decide whether they were going to buy it or not, whether or not I was there with them. So that didn't really fit my personality, but just thought about things. My dad had always been in sort of banking and finance, so that was probably in the back of my mind in some respect. And then, I guess really did like property. So sort of wanted to stay connected to property, and ended up basically starting up at Newcastle Uni doing economics and finance, and got a traineeship at a brokerage in Lake Macquarie at the same time. And mate, probably always thought that I would end up in a banking role in Sydney or Melbourne after my studies. But just really fell in love with the role, and like you do in a lot of industries, each year you get better and you make more money, and it becomes more exciting. And got to the point where at the end of the uni I thought, well, this is going pretty good, and a lot of the mates went off internships with NAB and the like.
Yeah.
And I thought I'd stick with it, and that's what I did. And I'd also at that time, got a passion for, I was working through uni full time as well, and I got a passion for actually buying properties, adding value, renovations, which then turned into small developments. So I was doing that as well, and I thought, well, maybe if I chain myself into a banking job that is X amount of hours, maybe that's not going to be basically in alignment with me wanting to continue and doing these projects, because I was living a pretty flexible, working long hours, but if my solicitor needed to see me to sign something at lunchtime, I could drive out quickly and do that.
Yes.
So yeah, mate, that was sort of how it happened, and I thought, well, I'll just keep going on the path I was on, and years on, obviously doing it still today, and really enjoying it.
Mate, that's awesome. And mate, that's like the living example of you might have a plan of what you want to do, but you don't actually know until you actually do it. And then as you do it, you get all the experience, you find out what works for you, what doesn't, and then you just become more informed, and you're able to make a better decision for what you actually want to do and what you want to achieve. So well done, mate.
Yeah, definitely. And like, I think that's the interesting thing going at the moment, is that there's a lot of people wanting to live their passion, and I think that's a great mantra on the whole. But the problem is, even your passion isn't always just the easy days, the sort of glory-filled stuff. Like I hate the sort of administration element of what we do, and I'm fortunate enough to have great staff that look after a lot of that now, not all of it. But when I started, it was basically menial sort of data entry work. So it was, I wouldn't say it was enjoyable, but in comparison to doing some jobs, it certainly wasn't that hard. But you sort of just got to grit your teeth and get through the parts that you don't like, I guess, with a view of the future.
Most definitely, mate. Most definitely. And mate, as we alluded to before, like, we're in the COVID moment right now. And In Australia, we're fortunate enough to not have been impacted health-wise as some of the other countries out there, through the government putting some regulations, restrictions on, to help flatten the curve, as the mantra was previously. But as a result of that, a lot of businesses have been impacted, and so speaking to different people in different areas, from marketing to building to social medias, what's your take on COVID and the impact it's had on the finance or the lending industry?
So there's a couple of questions in that, Quang, and I don't know which one you'd like me to start on. Is my take on that, and I don't know whether we'll come back to that at a later, or whether you want to look at it from an industry point of view. I might start with the industry point of view first, because I probably got a few unique views on the whole coronavirus. But from an industry standpoint, it definitely has shaken things up because, as you said, it was widespread. And I think a lot of the issues on the financial side, as much as, like the virus, in many people's opinion, could have ended up being really bad. And that's one argument of the health side. But the issues that were caused economically was due to, in a lot of cases, forced lockdown from government. So, look, that's ultimately where some businesses were. They were told, as of next week, you can't trade. As a result, that's filtered through to the economy. Jobs have been lost, and it's been pretty horrible. The banks were very, very forthcoming to say, they didn't say they won't get their payments. That's one interesting thing. They said we'll delay when we get our payments, which is, interesting in itself. But, they had to draw a line in the sand, and they said, look, we won't charge any penalty interest. We won't charge any, default administration fees. We will basically just get all our money back at a later stage.
Yeah.
Now, I think some banks reported upwards of sort of 11% of their mortgage book then went on to hold in certain banks. Depending on the bank, obviously different loans had different sort of levels. I think Macquarie Bank had over 50,000 loans put on pause. 40-odd thousand of those were car and leasing type finance facilities, and the rest were sort of mortgages. But so that had a massive effect. And what we then found was, with all those sort of things, when they're being good on one hand, and I consider that was reasonably good approach from the banks on the whole. On the other hand, they're then very guarded around who's coming in. So if we fast forward to the situation now, Quang, what we've found is that it's almost like the banks are going, well, there's this many people over here that aren't paying their mortgage. We need to make sure whoever comes in the door now is not going to go into that pile, because financially it's not worth them bringing in another customer who 4 months later says, oh, yeah, my industry's now been affected, I've got to put my loan on hold, because they've given that option to every customer. So every customer has the ability to pause their loan. Some banks, it's as easy as going on internet banking and hitting pause.
Yep.
So they're very, very reluctant to onboard new customers with that in the back of their mind. And that's what we're seeing. Levels of documentation requirements have just gone through the roof. Bank assessors very skeptical on people, and even I've had loan assessors ask me why is someone applying for this loan now? Like, why now? And it's like, well, they still want to buy a house and they still want to buy somewhere to live. Yeah. They're renting, their job's secure. And he's like, oh yeah, but why now? It's like, well, why not? Their job's not affected. So they've got a very guarded stance, and that's one thing we've noticed. So we're trying to prepare customers for a bit of a journey, because unfortunately it's a little bit drawn out. And another little thing is, a lot of the banks with offshore processing teams have just gone to the pack. So we've have to divert away from some lenders altogether, because 6 weeks sometimes or more just for them to actually first pick up a new application they've been sent. So imagine that, you get an inquiry into your business and you can't actually even respond to it for sort of upwards of 6 weeks, and that's major banks. So that goes to show how their processes have been sort of affected.
Yeah, most definitely. Wow, it's really interesting to because we may perceive the industry a particular way, and with with the past experience of all the regulations and whatnot that have come in, that have been made well known. But to get that insight, and I really love the example you use, where there's a whole group of people already here.
Yeah,
that they're really concerned about, and they just have to be more stringent on who they release funds to, so they don't add to that pile. And that's a really great way to paint that picture, so people can understand of how vigilant they have become.
Yeah, exactly. And that you get that from the minute you put an application in at the moment to the conversations you have. You just know that they're being told, look, we don't want the next application to be. We'd rather decline a loan now than bring a loan on that the person's not going to be able to pay. And I think, when you get in the position they're in, that's ultimately their biggest concern.
Yeah, and I guess adding to that as well would be the incentives that the government have put out there to support business owners, and for example, like pausing any mortgage repayments or loan repayments and that kind of stuff. And it's a great initiative from the government to do that, to release those funds to help keep particular industries alive, or to support our economy on that sense. But like most things, and we said this beforehand, there are positive and negative consequences to everything, and so with this particular these incentives, how are they impacted your particular industry?
It's a really good question, and I think if we just touch on the loan pauses again, because that's probably the predominant thing people are using if they are in some sort of trouble. I mean, the hard part is that whilst banks have, one of the big advantages is they've confirmed that they're not going to let the credit bureau companies know that person, essentially they're not going to report that data as being missed payment data. So what that means is you're not going to have a whole bunch of really bad history. If you put your loan on pause in the current circumstance, you're not going to have a whole bunch of bad repayment conduct, which would then probably lock you out of borrowing for a couple of years to come. So that's the plus. What we don't know yet is, say, someone who does that and then their circumstances change and then they need to sort of borrow for whatever reason shortly thereafter. If they're in that position, I believe it would become very difficult to justify being able to apply for any type of credit, because on one hand, you've just told Bank A that, you can't make a repayment, and, your repayments have literally stopped. A couple of months later, to then have to change that story, I think would be a hard one. And I think also out of the end of this, you may find that other banks are a little less willing to refinance customers that have done that. So you may find a bit of a situation where customers that use this opportunity with their current bank, they may well find they're in a relationship with that bank for a little bit longer than maybe what they would have hoped for, and then that bank sort of got them in a respect. So if they go and ask for a discount and things like that at a later stage, you may find that there's a flow-on effect because they're actually not able to move elsewhere.
Yeah, most definitely. It's as I alluded for, there's, for every action there are both positive and negative consequences, and the overwhelming response to the government incentives were, great, this is going to be great, this is going to help keep us alive, this is going to help allow me to pay my staff, to let them have some sort of income. We can stay afloat over the next couple of months by with the stimulus packages. But on the flip side, it's going to make, when you are ready, it's going to make attaining those finances or those funds you need in order to grow or scale a bit more tricky.
Yes,
because you've just kind of admitted that, hey, I can't make these payments. Okay, if you can't make those payments, how are you going to make these payments moving forward?
That's right, exactly, and we had a really interesting situation with a great client, and worked in an industry that was completely unaffected, and essentially had used the superannuation benefit where you could take out 10,000 of your super. Now, the customer was actually doing it because he actually believed that he may have to help his dad out at a later stage, who was looking at a possible pretty expensive surgery. So he had every good intention, a fantastic young guy, And we were like literally probably hours away from getting his loan approved, and the bank had then seen a credit into his personal bank account from super, and just on that alone, declined his application. And no matter how much we tried to argue the reasons why, they just drew the dots like you did before and said, well, hold on, this is for people that are in hardship. You did this, so therefore, we're not going to look past the fact that we think you must be in some sort of hardship. If he'd had his time again, he obviously wouldn't have done it. But it's one of those situations where they see that and they make an assumption based on what they think that means.
Yeah, most definitely. So I would encourage everyone to, if you're considering it, speak to a professional or an expert like yourself, or their trusted financial advisor, to weigh up the pros and cons and the impacts that it can have long term as well. Because it's a short term relief, but long term, you have to factor that in, especially if you want to take advantage of what's going to happen once we come out of this COVID opportunity full time. Mate, I know that you've got an interest and you've got a background in economics. I know we talked about government stimulus and all this extra finance and monies that the government, is forking out there, and even more so later on. Mate, how do you perceive the path that we're going to head down, or what kind of? I mean, we're not Nostradamus. No one can predict. But what's your intel telling you?
It's a really interesting one, Quang. I mean, the government's responded in a big way, and I suppose here probably we're small compared to, say, someone like the US and what they're doing in comparison, but a much bigger economy, obviously. But at the end of the day, I guess the one thing to keep in mind is that at some point this money will get paid for in basically one of two ways. You would have a period where you have to grow the economy at a larger growth rate and tax the same to pay it back. Yep. And then obviously the expanded GDP and the same tax rate will account for that. Or if we have the same level of output in the economy or less, we're going to need a higher level of tax to essentially pay that back. And then there's the theory of, so that's one thing, you end up with a tax rate that maybe, for instance, we will obviously experience, and then our kids could experience, etc. And then there's, another theory where people are out there, and, it's interesting. It was talked a bit about actually when I was at uni as well, about this whole sentiment, well, the government can always just borrow more off the Reserve Bank and, they basically create the money. And then, you look back in history when that's happened, and ultimately, whilst you might not see a tax increase on your tax return, what you start to see is the silent tax, which is inflation, because, as they create more and more currency, you've got more and more currency in the economy. You've got the same amount of ultimate goods and service that money is going into. So as a result, you start to see things increase. What that looks like down the track is going to be really interesting, I guess, because the hard part is that when do these governments know that they've gone enough, or when they're about to go too far? And it's an interesting one. I don't know. I don't know how they do that. Obviously, they must have some sort of idea when they're creating X amount of billion here and X amount of billion here. They must obviously have models that help with this. But that's the interesting thing, is do they pull back at some point completely and go, okay, guys, everyone's on their own now because we've created way too much. We've created way too much currency. We know that this could lead to really detrimental effects with inflation. Particularly if you've got a stagnant economy, people don't have much income or no income, and you've got prices of things rising. Stagflation is horrible because, it basically people starve, So a situation like that, or, do they pull back and start to show, some much tighter fiscal policy around saying, look, sorry, guys, JobKeeper's off, this is off, that's off, and I just don't know a government will do that. So it'd be interesting to see whether we see more and more stimulus, or whether we see them start to taper back at a certain point when they think they've sort of hit a threshold.
Most definitely, and I'm of your ilk. I'm really interested to see how this gets funded in the future, because no one likes to pay more taxes.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, we also don't want to be, not saying we'll go third world, but it will create that extremity between haves and have-nots, and Australia, and it's part of the reason why my parents fled Vietnam to come here. It's a land of equality and opportunity, and it can get a bit dicey. We just have to see how it plays out, and hopefully we just have to put our trust that the right people are making the right decisions and looking after the long-term interests of the country as well.
Yeah, exactly right. And, and secure your future as well in a way, because, at the end of the day, like in these type of situations, there is opportunities. And one thing, I talk to a lot of friends and customers about is getting educated around, what these sort of environments mean. And, you get, I guess I look at it, and one of the examples I give to people I'm talking to is, if you just know the government's making, hundreds of billions of dollars, or in the case of the US, there was an estimate from Deutsche Bank that said that the US Federal Reserve's balance sheet, so the debt that they've got, could get to 130 trillion. I mean, this is just insane, and they're adding over $1 trillion a year at the moment, but they're obviously saying that, that's only going to last for so long and whatever. But the analogy sort of is like, in a time like that, do you want to be holding what they're just creating by the, is that going to be what you're going to keep? Is that in a savings account? And you just think that they can, create hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars more of that stuff? Or do you want your money invested into actual assets? And whatever the preference is, I've got an obvious bias towards property because that's what's worked for me and that's my passion. But that's not, ultimately the only way to do it. I just would, say to a lot of people, you need to think about this as a situation that's unfolding, and where you want to hold your investments to make sure that your money's going to be secure and going to grow into the future.
Most definitely, and it comes back to how we think about money as well. And a lot of people get precious about money and think that they've got to hold on. They've worked hard for it. They've got to hold on to it. But ultimately, we give our own meaning to money. And if you think of it as a tool or as an asset building device, it can, like you said, it can help secure you into the future, because we have to. Yeah, it's better to do something than just to sit on it, essentially.
Yeah, that's right. And it's a combination of having a bit of a safety buffer there, and Robert Kiyosaki talks on this subject a lot. He talks about, he says cash is trash, and what he's saying not that he doesn't like money. He's a very wealthy guy, but he talks about it being cash because ultimately our currencies now have no tie to gold or any asset. The currencies have basically, they're just a promise that it's going to be worth, what you perceive it to be worth, and that a shopkeeper is going to accept it. But it's happened a lot in history. It's how Hitler got in power. It's how the Roman Empire basically fell. These governments can mismanage the economy. They've done it in the past, and they can ultimately, basically cause inflation to the point where money is really, really, or currency is really, really devalued.
Oh, mate, that's so much to take away there already, mate. Thank you for sharing all of that.
That's all right, mate. I go on for hours about this, particularly with red wine in hand.
We will have to do that, mate.
Yeah, for sure.
Mate, we said before, we're one of the lucky ones to not only continue to be working, but in your case, you've also been super busy, super flat out throughout this whole COVID period. And on the flip side, there are other, financial companies, businesses who are not doing so well. Mate, I just want to touch base on that, and what's been your key or your outlook to help you get through this period, to not only just survive it but also to thrive?
Yeah, thanks. Clang, when this happened, we, like a lot of people, my wife and I, Kerry and I, were obviously worried. When everything sort of started stemming from China and things, we were really worried about it, and we started, making sure we kept informed and doing our own independent research, and it did get to a point, and once again, call that partly being lucky because we're in Australia, but it got to a point where we just said, you know what, we just got to just read when we want to read things from the sources we want to read those from, but we're actually going to have isolation from mainstream media. That was the isolation we basically decided we're going to have. We took every action that, obviously the government suggested with, whether you should or shouldn't work from home. We gave all of our staff members the opportunity to do that. Some of them did want to do that, which we were happy with. But for the most part, we conducted our life, essentially within reason, the same as what it was, meaning that we went into the office and we basically treated every day like it was pre coronavirus. And that, to me, meant my daily routine was the exact same. Even though I couldn't go to a gym, I'm in an apartment where we're living at the moment. You probably can't see it, but I, set the gym up in the living room of our apartment in Newcastle, and basically just worked out in the morning. Ate the same thing, wore the same shirt, went into the office, and it was a little bit of a different place because there was some staff from home and vice versa. But I really truly believe it was that routine. And I firstly want to say as well that there's some people that I realise weren't in the position to be able to do that because they had homeschooling commitments. So I'm the first one to say, well, I was blessed with our industry. The fact that Kerry and I don't have kids yet, it sort of really was a lot easier for us to manage than many. So if anything, I think the lesson was more around basically trying to keep a routine, blocking out, the fear mongering, because, ultimately the news just wants people to plug in every day. The paper, like I think I read the Herald one time when we were having a coffee, and the first 20 pages were about coronavirus or something, and I just went, well, so I just thought, well, it's not going to serve me doing this. So I switched it off, and we basically looked for the information we needed. And then it just changed my life. And and we had conversations with people, and to me, it actually didn't exist in my life. And I know that's narrow because I'm lucky I didn't have family or friends affected. I don't know anyone who contracted it or anyone who knows anyone who contracted it. So I have been very blessed in that regard. Yeah. And I think as a country, we have obviously as well. But, me being worried about how many people are dying in Italy, as bad as this might sound, isn't going to serve me and my family and my purpose and my goals. I feel for anyone who's affected, but dwelling on it isn't going to help them either. So I got to the point where that was it, and we just went on with it. And I think that energy also starts to attract people, because I truly believe that there was people that referred us work that actually couldn't find someone who either was working and proactive and wanting to help their customer and in turn help them, through a referral. And I found that business started to flow that way. So it was nothing really special. And we've grown as a result. We've had a couple of our sort of bigger months, not record months, but certainly, a couple of the bigger months we've had in the last few years. And that was pretty much it in a nutshell. That was sort of how it went. That's how it's still sort of going now. And we're adapting through technology as far as IDing people through FaceTime calls and what we're doing here. So there's definitely has been some subtle changes, but the routine of what we were going into hasn't changed. And if I could just say one more thing, there's a lot of people I've talked to, Quang, and really, really successful guys. We had a bit of a conversation about this before. And it was like when this happened, it was like they couldn't see any opportunity in anything. It was obviously a black swan for all of us, but it was to them, it wiped them out, just, staying inside in home, obviously so many things going through their mind. And I think that is what caused the bigger problem in their personal situation and business than what actually was around them as far as coronavirus was concerned.
Most definitely, mate. Most definitely, and I'll just add to that as well, because I saw a little social media clip at the start on a law firm in Newcastle, established in 1903, I think, if I remember correctly. So they've been through both world wars. They've been through the Great Depression, and they were talking to one of the original partners, and they say, mate, and they were like, so what are you going to do during this whole COVID period? Just keep working. Just keep working. And part of and the way I see it is that, like life, business, like life, there's going to be lots of distractions around, and we're not downplaying the severity of COVID, because there have been lives lost, and it is a health concern. But because we've been distracted and there's been other things put in place, our mind gets taken away from our ultimate focus. So it comes back to knowing ultimately again what your outcome is. Bring it back to that. What is your goal? Stay focused on that. Have that purpose that you're working towards. But then you also have to execute. You have to keep executing. And then this is where it comes down to. You have to gain feedback from what's happening around you. As you said there. Oh, look, the government said we can't work. We can't all be in the office at the same time because of social distancing. All right. So let's take that on board. And let's set up a timetable or a schedule. Give that opportunity to work from home if you want to, or we'll have an A team or a B team. Let's adapt and adjust to and use the technology out there to support us. And the last thing I think is most important is you have to operate from a point of physical and mental excellence. So that means having the right frame of mind. understanding that, yes, that's out there, but what can I control moving forward? And so you still got up, dressed yourself, went to work as per program, because that's what gets you to be productive and effective and ensure that you can provide what's best for your clients.
And yeah, 100%. I know that if I got up an hour later, hour and a half later, hadn't worked out, maybe had something different for breakfast because you're a bit more relaxed. You don't have to sort of make a smoothie. You can make, I don't know, something different. Roll into a home office and, do that type of thing. I know for me, that definitely would have changed the whole dynamic of the day because I've started in a different pattern. I would have been in a different state. I'm on a different channel when I'm in the office to when I'm at home anyway. So I find it hard to switch that channel really quickly. So that's probably a big thing. But also I think, with the whole energy piece that I touched on, Quang, I think like it was such a big thing, and it still is, and it's obviously very important. But one thing I sort of decided, and this was a lot through your help, was I wanted to be empathetic with people, particularly because we were having a lot of conversations with people who had been affected, right? We were a part of, those restructuring of loan repayments and things. But like they don't need me to tell them what the death rate is in New York City and how many body bags are coming out of the hospitals. I mean, like that's not my job. My job was to basically give them the information that I'm an expert at, which was to do with their loan. So there was a certain level of empathy which we worked through together because I was worried that probably my attitude might have been missing that and off point there a little bit. So I needed to make sure that we were, empathetic, but still basically on task and talking to them about, the stuff that we can help with, instead of getting into, getting into sort of a sort of conversation that's basically not productive for anyone,
Most definitely, mate. Most definitely. And I think my wife went to Tony Robbins, was it 2 years ago, and she came back with a singlet. And I think what you're saying, there's a saying on that singlet, and I think what you're saying is so true of this. It goes, where your focus goes, your energy flows. So if you focus on serving your clients, if you focus on making the most out of your day, if you focus on being the utmost person that you can, then that's where your energy is going to go, and so if you focus on, and conversely, if you focus on the down and dour news of, mortality rates and the downscaling of the economy, and focus on people losing their jobs, and that's no disrespect to those guys. We acknowledge that that's happening there, but you can't help but drag yourself into that energy level. And then if you do that, then how does that help you do what you need to do? It doesn't, not at all.
100%. I mean, you and I obviously have had some great productive, coaching sessions, and another guy that I've worked with a little while, Dr. Fred, said, I actually sent him a message. I don't know if I sent you this one, Quang, but it was about how many CEOs had stepped down right before the coronavirus thing, right?
Yeah.
So I've sent him this thing and said, look how many CEOs, and I'm getting into the whole conspiracy theory because I definitely read a lot of that. That's my nighttime reading, is trying to understand what this is about, and so I sent him this. And his response was, stop gossiping and get back to work. And
love it.
And it was a good reminder because I sent it to him in work hours, and it was just that reminder that I needed. It was like, he was obviously interested in the content. I'm very interested in the content. I mean, we could sit back and email back and forward and talk about it for the next 3 hours about how, this is just so coincidental or it's all staged, whatever. It doesn't matter. But that just put me straight back on task because, look, we can talk about that stuff on the weekends and have opinions and stuff like that. But at that time, on a Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock or whatever, it just, it didn't interest him in the slightest. And that was a really good little reminder when I even found myself sort of falling into that trap, I guess you'd say.
Yeah, it didn't serve your purpose at all.
Yes, exactly.
Mate, look, we know that we can chat and talk about this forever. But I guess to sum up, to give something that people can take away with, I mean, of everything we've said there, especially with I guess people, if they're looking to look at lending or borrowing, what's I guess the key thing that you would like people to take away?
So the key thing I'd like to take away is, and it sort of ties a lot of it in together, is obviously, like I know that a lot of people at the moment are, just getting by, and obviously that's important. So home loan pauses and things where needed, that's what they're there for.
Yeah.
But I'd encourage people to still look at the potential opportunity in this. And if we tie it back into sort of the economics and things that we talked about, I do believe that, out the other side of this, there's going to be some opportunity that whether that's someone who starts a business, Quang, or whether some sort of opportunity. And I think that when you are in a position where you're at this point in time just thinking, hey, I just want to worry about paying my loan repayment in a couple of months' time, that's understandable. But I think if you can just carve out a little bit of time to even just plan what the next 3 to 5 years looks like, and this is stuff guys I'm sure do with you, and ultimately have that bigger vision, because we can help people navigate through the finance, but I think that's the big one is, how people exit this position, this situation, I should say, we're in, is going to really be determined to be basically back on them and what they're determined to sort of make of it. So that's what I've seen, and that's how I've seen a lot of people benefit, is dealing with what's in front of them now, but planning for the future. And we're already starting to see some of our clients that are thinking that way, getting approvals in place and thinking, well, hey, look, what's going to come out the other side of this, and is there going to be opportunities available? So that's probably the one thing.
Yeah, mate, that's so true. Use this time to get clear on your vision. I would encourage everyone to get clear on your vision, because if you know what you're going to aim for and you know what you're striving for, then you're going to make the right decisions based on it, what's going to move you to that vision a lot quicker. So, mate, great words there. I really appreciate it. Mate, if anyone want to, I'll start again. If anyone wanted to just touch base with you, to ask you a question, or get an insight onto what's happening about their financials or that kind of stuff, or even property, share your insights around property, what would be the best channels for them to reach you?
Definitely. So the best probably way to get started is if they just want to shoot me a quick email with some details, and we can get in touch. That's just Brenden with an EN, so BRENDEN at moneylinks.com.au. Links being like with the S, not anything fancy with a Z. Or X maybe, that's a modern way to do it. And if they also, just an easy one to remember would just be jump straight on to say Instagram and put in MoneyLinks, and you'll see us there with the green logo, and you could message through, and Kerry or Peter will get that message and be able to get you in contact with me. So,
mate, that's awesome. Again, I just want to thank you again for taking the time out of your day, from your beautiful apartment. I can see there.
Home, gym, apartment, office, everything.
All in one for the moment. But mate, look, thank you once again. Look, we'll definitely catch up once we're allowed to sit around a cafe for a bit longer than 20 minutes, because we'll need more than that to chat.
Well.
But mate, thank you once again, and enjoy the rest of your day, buddy.
Thank you, mate. Appreciate it, and thanks very much for having me.